Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar on students with autism, intellectual and developmental disabilities, considerations for returning to an in-person instruction. We are honored that Dr. Brian Friedman accepted the invitation to present today. Before I officially introduce our presenter, please allow me to address a few logistical items. I am Will Francis, Project Director for Post-Secondary Education at the UCLA Tarjan Center. The Tarjan Center at UCLA is a federally designated Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities and your host for today's webinar. Support for today's webinar comes from the California Community College's Chancellor's Office through a contract that enables us to provide technical assistance and training to California Community Colleges, DSPS, who are working to provide equitable supports, services, and opportunities for students with disabilities, including intellectual disability and autism. Your participation is much appreciated. Some of our institutions are reevaluating the safety and related concerns of returning to face-to-face instruction and services. Among the important topics include, but are not limited to, timing, when, and processes, how the implementation of in-person services will be provided in the advent of the current COVID-19 pandemic. In preparation for this webinar, we launched a brief survey of convenience and received information about the extent to which disability support services staff were meeting with students in person and virtually. We also obtained information about whether the format of DSS's meetings with students aligned with courses, other services on campus, and other activities. Given the challenges that students were facing and the services that were being provided, we asked what was being missed and where the short-term and long-term gaps in student outcomes lie. Of the 44 individuals who responded to the survey, we learned that campuses were evenly split among the institutions who were meeting with students in person, virtually, and those who met with students using a hybrid format or model. Largely, people with the DSS format were meeting with students were aligned with the format for providing instruction and services to students on campus. We learned that enrollment was down. Some students who were reserved or shy were missing out on ways of interacting. We heard that some counseling, mental health supports, and LD assessment services are being missed. Some said their mental health and mindfulness needs and that they were unsure how to address or how to implement a system of supports to these needs without overstepping their role. Some said for many of their students, virtual instruction was not ideal. Issues around attendance, support, and connections were raised as emerging concerns and issues. Course cancellations were reported, and the impact of these cancellations on future funding was raised as a concern, as well as the ability to allow students who thrive in a virtual environment to continue in that space that was highlighted in the survey. Today, we are going to join in a conversation about strategies that may be considered as we think about how to support students with autism, intellectual, and developmental disabilities as we transition back to in-person instruction and services. We are not attempting to provide an answer to all of the issues related to return to campus, but we aspire to facilitate a helpful conversation and to provide some practical examples of strategies to add to your toolbox. Thank you for joining us today. A number of our colleagues are unable to attend today's webinar and have requested a recording of the proceedings. In order to facilitate access to a clean recording of the webinar, we have muted all calls. As we proceed through today's presentation, our presenter would love to respond to questions that arise from or that are related to the content of the presentation. Please look at the bottom of your Zoom program display where you will find the chat or text box. We are asking at this time for you to insert your questions into the chat box throughout the duration of the webinar. We will address your questions and welcome you to submit as many questions as naturally arise. Our presenter may stop occasionally to address your questions, and we are asking you to insert your questions into the chat at any time. We'll address as many questions as possible during the presentation, and we have reserved 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the presentation for additional questions as well. This may be a good time to test the chat function. Please enter a greeting into the chat function or chat box at this time. Thank you. I see people are doing that. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for joining us today. And now I'll provide some information about our presenter. Dr. Brian Friedman designs and leads innovative service models, training initiatives, and systems change projects at the University of Delaware's Center for Disability Studies. He and his team have created multiple college and career programs for students with disabilities. This includes Spectrum Scholars, a college to career initiative which supports undergraduate autistic college students at the University of Delaware, and the Career and Life Studies Certificate, an inclusive higher education program for students with intellectual disabilities. The purpose of these programs is to not just work with students, but also, perhaps more importantly, create a more inclusive campus community that welcomes these students in all facets of college. Dr. Friedman also provides technical assistance to college support programs across the country, including as part of the Think College team. Dr. Friedman has a background in clinical psychology and conducts research and training on the mental health of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. He's currently designing mental health interventions for college students with IDD and co-occurring mental health challenges. Dr. Friedman is a faculty member in the University of Delaware's School of Education and teaches in the Disability Studies minor. Brian's research and clinical programs have been profiled on local and national media outlets such as Delaware Public Media, USA Today, and National Public Radio. He has presented at national and international conferences and has published in a variety of peer-reviewed journals. Thank you, Dr. Friedman, for your willingness to share from the wealth of your knowledge with the California community colleges. And now, without further ado, here's our presenter, Dr. Brian Friedman.
Thank you, Will, and hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me here. I was really honored when Will reached out to me and asked if I could share some thoughts with you all, engage in a discussion with you all. The work that you're doing is incredibly important, and it comes as an especially critical time in the lives of people with disabilities. The information I'm going to share today may be new to some of you. It may reinforce lots of ideas or the types of things that you all are perhaps already trying. The fact of the matter is, this remains a difficult time for all of us, myself included. And so, you know, part of what I'm always appreciative of is hearing from others about their thoughts, resources, and suggestions. So, as Will mentioned, I would encourage you to use the chat box today. If we were live together in an audience, I would be encouraging you to share live whatever your questions were, or if you had additional thoughts. We can certainly use Zoom to facilitate those kinds of discussions. And I've tried to incorporate opportunities today for you all to be able to give feedback and share thoughts on your own unique experiences. I'd like to start by giving thanks to some of the folks that Will mentioned. I do very close work at the University of Delaware with programs that are quite similar to the kind of work that many of you are doing. We have programs at the university that support students with intellectual disabilities who are enrolled in a certificate program, as well as undergraduate autistic students at the university. I also wanted to give thanks to my colleagues at Think College. As many of you may be aware, Think College is the national leader in supporting students with intellectual disabilities in university settings. I'm actually appearing here as part of my work on Think College's technical assistance team. They offer a great number of resources that I would strongly encourage you to consider taking a look at. I'm also a part of a group called the Alliance of Autism College to Employment Programs. We know that more and more universities and colleges were supporting students on the autism spectrum, and that doesn't mean just supporting them in being successful in their coursework, but rather supporting their entire experience within their colleges and throughout post-secondary education, as well as helping them to think about what post-college life is going to be like and how can they be successful in their post-college life and be adequately prepared for that. So with the Alliance, we do a lot of work together in sharing information, as well as sharing information out to others about how we can think broadly about how to support students, as well as how to support our campus communities to be more inclusive. A note on the language that I'll use today. Some of you may already have seen, there are times when I will use person-first language, so saying things like person with autism. Other times I will use identity-first language, in other words, referring to autistic people. We have, it used to be not too long ago that we would prefer and in fact only use person-first language. Although we now I hear from many college students who prefer identity-first language, referring to themselves as autistic. And it's for that reason that I do use both in the context of this presentation, although I mention it because there are some certainly that feel very strongly about the use of one versus the other. So if you'll indulge me, I thought we would start with just taking a minute or two and engaging in a brief relaxation and meditation. It's really important that we serve as role models for the students that we serve. And I think that one of the best strategies and one of the best supports we can offer for students is helping them to find a place of peace in an environment that is especially chaotic and stressful. Which is the kind of place that they often find themselves in post-secondary education. So if you are able to, or if it's comfortable for you, I invite you to close your eyes and listen. Of course, if you need to keep your eyes open, that is okay too. Position your body in a comfortable place. And I want you to start by taking a deep breath in through the nose and then out through the mouth. Place your feet on the floor so that you can feel what is below you. Breathing in through the nose, breathing out through the mouth. Breathing in, feeling the lungs expanding. Breathing out, feeling a sense of letting go. Breathing in to feel the body getting fuller. Breathing out to feel the release of any tension. Breathing in, feeling alive and awake. Breathing out and feeling the muscles relaxing. Breathing in that sense of fullness and breathing out that unnecessary tension. Feel free to open your eyes. They've been closed. And I hope that was helpful for you in becoming more centered, relaxed, and grounded as we spend the next hour and 15 minutes together. These types of brief activities can be especially useful with students with disabilities at the beginning of support sessions. And ideally, students can also learn to do them on their own. Regular practice will also make it easier for them to access these types of coping strategies during particularly stressful moments. So now that we are hopefully more relaxed, I'd like to turn to something that offers you the opportunity to speak to things that might be a little more stressful. So if you would, I'm going to turn off my screen sharing and switch to a different screen in a moment and ask you to answer the question in 1 or 2 words. What are your feelings about returning to campus? So if you would text the number 37607, and in the body of the message, you're going to put this text in all caps, Brian Friedma 017. And please, once you receive the confirmation, you can go ahead and text your response to this question in 1 to 2 words. What are your feelings about returning to campus? You can then send an additional message with additional words about how you're feeling about the return to campus. So I'm going to stop sharing and shift over to the screen where we'll all be able to view your responses together. These will come in anonymously, but we should be able to see them. Hang with me just for a moment. All right, I'm hearing that it did not work for everyone. So I think what we will do is let you take a moment, and I apologize that it's not working as I had hoped, but that's okay. We've learned during this age that these things happen. So if you don't mind, and if you're willing to, in the chat box, I'd like you to go ahead and share in 1 or 2 words, what are your feelings about returning to campus? Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling scared? Thank you, Bonali. Great, so keep those responses coming in. And what we're seeing, what we are seeing is a lot of mixed feelings. And your feeling is certainly similar to what I'm hearing across the country, what we're experiencing on our campus. Some reluctance, concern, anxiety, but also excitement, going back and forth between the two. I think there are many who are wishing we could be back in a place where we were pre-COVID. There are many others who, some are also excited about what lies ahead because we've learned some new ways to engage with students during this time. Thank you all for sharing that. Yeah, and that, thank you for sharing that, Candace. The concerns about health issues, really, that they abound for ourselves, for the students that we serve. You know, when I gave a talk, a similar kind of talk about a year ago, we were looking at a year, and now we're looking at a full 2 years, and there's just so much that we are dealing with. We're dealing with fears for health and well-being, for all people around us and ourselves. In addition to COVID, we have continued protests and disagreements and discouragements. All of this has resulted in changed plans and timelines. There's new kinds of pressures and requirements. Many people are feeling very isolated or experiencing conflict, as well as disconnection. I agree with you, Lynn. I think that ideally having collective dialogues will create a better sense of engagement and bring communities together. I think it's part of why I appreciate you all being here today, to think together about this. And so I think for those of you that are working and supporting students with disabilities every day, you know that this isn't just true for all of us, it's also true for them. And in many ways, students with autism or other intellectual and developmental disabilities have experienced these things in a heightened way, perhaps because they were because of the isolation that they had previously felt, or because of health issues that they had that often are identified as co-occurring challenges with autism or intellectual and developmental disabilities. And this includes mental health challenges. Students on the autism spectrum and others with IDD are at particular risk for mental health challenges. We know that we see higher rates of depression and anxiety, and a higher likelihood of prior trauma. Autistic people and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have also encountered especially low expectations throughout their life. And that for many has probably impacted their thoughts on their ability to succeed in a college setting. It wasn't too long ago that we really didn't think about autistic people or students with intellectual disabilities in college settings. And I think that those low expectations, sadly, are still built into the kind of fabric of our communities and the kinds of messages that those individuals and their families are sent from very early on in their lives. And as a result, many have had the responsibility of proving themselves in situations where we don't typically ask others to prove themselves. I put a resource on here that many are not familiar with. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, that is designed as a diagnostic manual for mental health challenges. It's often used to diagnose depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders. There is a diagnostic manual that was specifically designed for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's called the DMID. It's now in its second edition. And because we know that mental health challenges can sometimes look a bit different with autistic people or with people with other IDD, this has become a very useful tool as we are educating others and educating ourselves on how to help identify mental health challenges. We know that prevalence of co-occurring mental health challenges is quite high among people with autism and intellectual and developmental disabilities. Studies have found that approximately 70% of children with ASD or IDD have at least one mental health diagnosis. We know that many are at risk, an increased risk for suicide compared to the general population. And unfortunately, it's difficult for them to find help. And this is for lots of different reasons. We know that many mental health professionals also feel ill-equipped to work with people with autism and intellectual and developmental disabilities. So people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are experiencing mental illness may exhibit those symptoms and mental health challenges in different kinds of ways, and which sometimes make them difficult to diagnose. Our own biases can also make them sometimes more difficult to diagnose. Sometimes that's due to what's called diagnostic overshadowing. So what this means is when we know that someone has a diagnosis of autism or an intellectual disability, we tend to dismiss symptoms that we would otherwise look at and consider depression and anxiety, because we just sort of put those symptoms into a bucket of either autism or intellectual disability or whatever that might be. Withdrawal is a great example of this. So oftentimes when a neurotypical person is withdrawn, that would be a warning sign of depression. However, when an autistic person is withdrawn, we just often automatically assume that that is a symptom of their autism. Also, due to more limited receptive and expressive language skills, we might be reluctant to identify mental health challenges. And we don't have great assessment measures for supporting people with IDD in identifying their own mental health challenges. So I thought I'd share with you, as we continue to consider mental health challenges, and after we do this, we're going to consider mental health challenges in the context of our campuses right now. I thought I'd share with you, I think, a really beautiful poem that was written by an alumni of the University of Delaware, Samantha Rosenthal. Sam actually helped me and others to build the Spectrum Scholars Program at the university. In a moment, I'm going to read a poem she wrote where she described how her autism, ADHD, and anxiety intersect and send her different messages and sometimes conflicting messages in the face of a very stressful situation. As you're reading and listening, I'd like you to consider, what are the different messages she receives from her different disabilities? How do these different messages and disabilities intersect, reinforce, or sometimes contradict each other? What sorts of coping strategies does she use to get through the experience? And how might Sam attribute some of those coping strategies to her disabilities? She doesn't do this necessarily, although I would suggest that a really important mechanism for supporting Sam, if she were a student that you were working with, would be to link some of these coping strategies as well to some of the disabilities that she identifies with. So here is Sam's poem, and it's going to take me about 3 minutes to get all the way through this. I wake up and the time is 1:43, and my exam's at 1 o'clock, and I'm in trouble. Because autism gave ADHD the wheel when I was distracted with anxiety, and I lost track of time, and I lost track of the deadlines, because finals week does not have a routine. And I'm in trouble because I've messed up, and things aren't how they were supposed to be. And anxiety says go, and autism says stop, and ADHD doesn't know what to do. And I don't know what to do, because what can you do when anxiety says that you need to do something, and then says that anything you try to do is wrong? And autism says you need to shut down right now, but anxiety says that is wrong. And ADHD is a scattered mess, and I'm a scattered mess, and there is a problem. But there is a problem. And when there is a problem, I am not autism, ADHD, or anxiety. I am stubborn, and stubborn gets things done, and I am in motion. I grab a water bottle and a pencil and my notebook and my backpack, and I'm out the door and moving And when I get to the exam and I'm about to go in, anxiety says stop, because if I go in, that will be wrong, because they will know I messed up and they will hate me and they don't want me to go in, and I cannot go in. I cannot. And I do, because I am stubborn and I need to get things done. And anxiety cannot breathe, and ADHD cannot focus, and autism wants to stop and shut down, but I have a test in front of me and I know what needs to be done, and I will do it. And when ADHD is at the wheel and I cannot pay attention, I flip to another page and find an interesting problem. And when autism says I cannot, says I need to stop, need to rest, need to rebalance, I show it how much we've already done. And when anxiety says I am dying, I tell it I am busy and it will have to come back later, because there is work to be done and anxiety will not do it. It is 3 o'clock and I've done most of my exam, and I'm not wearing socks and my pencil has no eraser, and I'm still in my pajama pants, and I have another exam after this. So when the teacher says pencils down, I put down my pencil and give him my exam, and I go to the next place. And my autism says rest, and my anxiety says study. And I do some of both in the 30 minutes before the exam. And I am stubborn, and I take that exam too. And I go home and I should study, but ADHD is tired and I am tired and I need more rest. And I'm no longer stubborn. I am tired, and anxiety is at the wheel, and it says I should be worried, stressed, sad, miserable, afraid because I messed up. And autism is listening to it, and ADHD is not listening to anyone. But I did my best, and I cannot change the past. And I tell anxiety that being worried, stressed, sad, miserable, afraid will not help right now. And I tell autism all the reasons why it will be okay. And I let ADHD rest, and I am okay. I can feel Sam's, I don't know about you, but part of what I appreciate about that is I can almost sort of feel Sam's experience as I go through that. So some questions for you. What are some of the different messages Sam's receiving from her different disabilities? How are they impacting her? I'd like to hear from you in the chat box. What is she hearing from her autism or her anxiety or ADHD that you heard? Yeah, very conflicting messages, very different directions. Anybody have any examples that stood out to them about the kinds of things, even if you don't remember exactly? What sorts of things did, go, stop, wrong, autism staying stop, anxiety says go and autism says stop, tiredness, wow. Yes, Janice, that's a great observation. Distracting in the moment, absolutely. And as you all mentioned, some of them intersect, some of them reinforce each other, some of them contradict each other. She has very mixed emotions. What sort of coping strategies does Sam use to get through the experience? Yeah, Bonali, I love her stubbornness too. So how can we frame stubbornness within her in the context of her disabilities? Do we know any of those disabilities, autism, anxiety, or ADHD, to have a sense of stubbornness about them? It's a great point, Casey. Yeah, she doesn't ignore any of them. She really addresses them. She sort of allows herself to experience them. Yeah, Liliana, someone who's obsessive. And I know many people who are autistic who many people might complain that they're stubborn. But Janice is right, stubbornness is motivation. So her stubbornness comes through. So Miriam, I'm so glad that you wrote perseverance. So And that word is so funny because perseverance is very much like another word that we use actually to describe autism. And that is persevering, which is to repeat the same thing over and over. And some of the work that we do, and I think some of the most impactful work that you can do, is to help your students with disabilities embrace their strengths and see them as a part of their disabilities. I know you know your students are struggling a lot right now, and they're going to struggle as they're coming back to campus because they're going to have to adjust to all new things. They're going to have to interact with people in ways that might be uncomfortable. Many of your students might have been very happy to be online for a lot of the interactions that they're having, and now they have to go back to an environment that maybe they don't love, and they are very uncomfortable with. So helping them to increase their self-awareness so they can identify, like CM does, where their challenges are coming from, helping them to identify their strengths and helping to build their coping strategies, I think can do a world of good for them. You are in a great position to do that. You're right, Joe. She is speaking to stubborn as a persistence toward her goals. So I'm wondering for you all, and you shared some things to this effect in your in the survey that you did ahead of time for Will and I. And thank you so much for participating in that, because it really helped me kind of understand where you are at for this talk. I'd like to hear from you in the chat box. What has the past 2 years been like for your students? So what have been some of the stressors that they've experienced? And thank you for that, Liliana. Exhaustion, uncertainty. Zoom has been a stressor. Absolutely. Being able to focus. It has been a really difficult time for the students that we support. And as you talk to them, what sorts of supports are you hearing from them that they desire? I know the list can go on and on around their stressors. What sort of supports have they been looking for? Yeah, direct contact and in-person interaction. Our students have missed that too. And I think even more so, Liliana, you bring up a great point, emotional support, however that's coming, whether that's through virtual or in person. Yeah. That's a great point, Catherine. It can be very difficult for students to put their finger on what would be helpful for them. When your students pictured going to college when they were in high school, they certainly didn't picture, or I'm almost certain they didn't picture what's happening right now. This is great, thank you. I think this speaks to the wide range of stressors and also the kinds of supports they desired. And it seemed like what cuts across all of those supports that many of you mentioned, or many of them at least, is really strong interpersonal support. So, being able to connect with someone who's willing to listen to them, who is able to empathize with them and help them develop some strategies for what they're going to do. So about a year ago when we were planning previously, excuse me, for a return to campus, we conducted a survey, myself and the Alliance group that we mentioned earlier. We conducted a survey of autistic students across the country to understand where were the areas they were most anxious about in returning to class. And you can see that, you can see those that were the most anxiety provoking for them across the different categories. You can see we had anywhere from 63 to 76 people answer each of these questions. Some just chose not to indicate their whether or not they were anxious. What I think is interesting is to look at the fact that wearing masks and social distancing was one of those things that was least concerning for them. I tend to think that's because there are very specific rules around wearing masks and social distancing. And so those are rules that autistic people and people with other disabilities can learn. Now, it may be difficult for them to learn, but they can still learn them, versus some of these other areas that are more abstract, and there's a lot of uncertainty associated with them. And so I think these also speak to areas that are important to allow students to talk about as you're supporting them. And this will be a running theme throughout my talk, that, you know, I think as you start to connect in person with students, or whether you're continuing to connect with them virtually, because I know many of you are going to continue to do that, giving them the space to talk about where they're at and what they are struggling with. Thank you for that reminder, Will, and I will share as well. If you have questions as we're going along, or if you have comments that you want to share, feel free to add them. So we asked in this survey what supports students desired, or other concerns that they had. And they spoke about needing and wanting academic supports. They talked about different academic supports, various forms of general support, social support. They talked about some of the concerns that they have about online classes, as well as concerns that they have for in-person classes. The final bullet on here always catches my eye, the concerns that they have about in-person classes, which is others not following safety procedures. I think this can be an especially challenging one for individuals who, for whom the following of rules is so important. We know that for a variety of reasons, we have many people who may not follow safety procedures, or may not follow safety procedures that there's disagreement by some. Even when we know we live in a world where there are lots of opinions about things. There's opinions about things in the face of data and medical information, but nonetheless, there are different opinions, and people are approaching COVID in a lot of different ways. And so this can be an especially stressful experience. And there is very little control that they have over that, which can be quite distressing. If we think about why these students originally came to college, it was probably to build social connections, take classes they're excited about, get to be decision makers in their own lives in a different kind of way, advocate for themselves, and build toward a career and a post-college life. And yet, in the face of not just a pandemic and the logistical shifts, imagine how they're being impacted through the experience of anxiety, depression, isolation, and self-esteem. So I'd like to shift and talk a bit about how we can support students in a variety of areas. And I'm going to talk about academics, mental wellness, and social support. Social support in terms of on-campus as well as virtual settings. And I would encourage you to ask questions as we go along, or if there are strategies or particular resources that you have on your campus, I would encourage you to share that as well. So, how can we support students on academics? Well, we can support them around executive functioning, helping students plan for their semester, helping them to set goals, both academic and social goals, breaking down courses, and integrating these things into a total plan for the semester. So some of these strategies might include using planning apps or processes. That could be things as basic as Google Docs and the Google Calendar, or using a more specialized app like My Study Life. Thinking about how to use learning management systems and assignment trackers, helping them with goal setting, and also engaging in backwards planning. That is, working with them to look at their syllabi and looking ahead to the end of the semester of what things are due and helping them to plan backwards based on those due dates or those exam dates. So I'm interested in hearing what sorts of strategies are you all using for executive functioning? What sort of apps are you finding to be especially helpful for students? Anything anyone wants to put out there? Oh, Momentum. Vicky, I don't know that one. I'll have to check that one out. Great. And you're right, Miriam, regular check-ins are really helpful. And I think proactive check-ins are also helpful. Asking students to remember to check in with their coach during exam time is often too much for many students. And so I think it's great if they can do that. And if you can help build reminders into their calendar to do that, that is great. But proactive check-ins, and sometimes understanding that students may need more check-ins than at other times during the semester is especially helpful. Now, of course, that means that your lives are that much busier during that time period, because if you're doing more check-ins with everybody during which what I'm sure is an already busy schedule, that can also feel really chaotic. So finding ways to do group check-ins, I think, can also be quite helpful. In supporting around academics, having access to staff, as was just suggested, good job, Miriam, predicting what I was about to say, is very important. So keeping lines of communication open, having ways to reach a support person in case of urgent need, and supporting access to resources. We know that it will be difficult for students to predict when they will need support, and it will be important for them to be able to access support. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a support person around general support available 24 hours a day. I think it's still important that we create boundaries and help students to learn when resources are available. And I think we want to consider that these days students are needing more support than they might otherwise need, because there are so many things that are chaotic right now, so many things in our lives that are unstable. These are great. Thank you all for sharing in the chat box. For those of you that aren't seeing, we've got lots of good suggestions. StudyMate, MindMap. Thank you. So as you're creating better access to staff, finding ways for the students to be able to schedule their appointments with you online, holding virtual office hours as well as in-person office hours, are all really important. And then, of course, making sure that students do have access to resources in case of more urgent needs, especially mental health needs. So giving them access to crisis lines or other resources, reminding them if they are in counseling, helping them to understand what sort of plan has been built in with their therapist. And that might mean working with them to connect with their therapist so that there can be a sharing of information, obviously with the student's permission, or helping them to think about other people in their lives, whether that's family members or other loved ones or friends who they can turn to when they're needing support. Thinking about tutoring opportunities. I think it can be really easy when we're virtual or when we're in hybrid formats for these kinds of supports to fall by the wayside. But again, this is one of those services that many students are going to need that much more, especially if the learning environment has changed for them. So supporting them and utilizing the academic supports that are available on your campus. Helping them to understand and in fact, advocating for getting through some of those systemic barriers. If your campus is anything like ours, accessing faculty for office hours has also become more difficult during COVID. Some faculty are unfortunately just less available for a variety of reasons. Some are only holding virtual office hours. And for students that are uncomfortable with this can be very difficult. And so students might need more support in finding ways to connect with faculty members. Or academic departments might benefit from outreach from your office in talking about the particular challenges that students with disabilities face in reaching faculty and coming up with some compromises and then communicating those things and access points to the students. In general, finding ways to check in. So when you do these check-ins with students, and I'm sure for your campuses, you all check in with students at different kinds of intervals. But during these check-ins, it's important to talk with the students about whether or not they're on track. Do they have and do they understand their weekly plan? And do they have an opportunity to connect with others? You want to build responsibility and build interdependence during this. So the DSPS Club, I'm not sure what that is, Liliana. Is that a more of like a social atmosphere where students can connect with each other? Great, that's great, yeah. Finding mechanisms for them to be able to offer peer support to each other is really helpful. We've recently at the university actually built, we were doing a lot of individualized support for a while and we realized, one, we were covering the same kinds of things with each individual student. So our time was not being used efficiently. And we realized there's only so much listening that they're gonna do with us. In many cases, they're gonna listen more to their peers. And so what we've done in our campus is actually also created and built a stronger group coaching model. And so we now have a 1 credit course that students take that functions as a kind of group coaching model. So we have a semi-curriculum. It's designed as a pass-fail course. It's really basically determined by attendance, but that can be helpful. But also more informal opportunities to connect with their peers is really critical. As Miriam's suggesting, group virtual coffee with student, whether that's with staff or with fellow students, can be really helpful and also really relaxing. I think it is important with students to have an open conversation, assuming your campus is one that allows for either virtual or in person. It's important to have an open discussion with students about their preferences and about the advantages and disadvantages for them of in-person versus virtual coaching. This is actually a great opportunity to build the student self-determination, to allow them the opportunity to gather information and make decisions for themselves about what works best for them, and then giving them the opportunity to test that out. We certainly have some students who prefer virtual coaching, and we then have to give them the feedback that virtual coaching doesn't seem to be working that well. They're not as focused during virtual coaching and clearly distracted by other things that are going on and not following through in the same kind of way with things that are being brought up. That would have never come up had we never gone with virtual coaching, their initially preferred coaching option when we first started. So having those kinds of open discussions, I think, honors the student and respects the student as an adult, as a person who has the right to really think through those decisions together with their support team. You also want to think about optimizing days and times for check-in with the student. And managing student schedules, especially if you have a large caseload of students you're working with, balancing that can be really difficult. And giving students the opportunity as much as possible to be able to identify what are going to be the best days and times for them to meet will be really important. And of course, as I'm sure many of you are already doing, you still want to build in, whether you're virtual or in person, visual supports across the different types of activities. We know that giving students access to information in a lot of different ways are going to really benefit them. And in fact, we know that many autistic people and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities do often benefit from information that they can see because it allows them to take in the information more at their own pace and return to whatever it is that's being shared with them over and over again as much as they might need until they understand it. So how can we support student wellness? Well, I think it starts with anxiety management, helping students to manage the anxiety that's hindering their success. So I think this starts with mental health counseling and helping the student to consider whether or not counseling is something that would be beneficial to them. What we've started doing is really at the outset of our meetings with the students, when they are a first-year student on our campus, actually at orientation, and we do this and share this with families too, is we say, we see mental health counseling as a benefit to autistic students and to students with disabilities who are receiving support through our program. Because we are not mental health counselors, and yet we know that many students on campus, and especially students with disabilities, struggle with mental health challenges. So we embrace the idea of mental health counseling, and we want the person's counselor or therapist to be a part of their support team. So having upfront open conversations about mental health counseling can be really helpful. Now, you may have some students that are reluctant for whatever reason. You may have some students that see mental health counseling as a separate thing, and they don't want to give you access to their mental health counselor. That's okay, and they're certainly allowed to have that. But I think if we're upfront about sharing that mental health is a critical issue for many, many students with disabilities in particular, and we know that mental health counseling can be beneficial, it starts to open the door to those open conversations. Supporting students in practicing mindfulness is also quite helpful. And you don't need to be a mental health counselor to support students in practicing mindfulness. Sharing with them strategies or connecting them with resources that allow them to learn breathing techniques, participate in yoga, using apps like Calm can be especially helpful for students as they're learning how to decompress in stressful situations, and even better, how they can prepare themselves for stressful situations that are coming up. Another strategy that we often use with students is helping them to identify triggers for anxiety and the calming strategies that they can use. Now, again, this is something that we try to do proactively at the very beginning of our work with them. We know that all students are going to experience anxiety in college. we know that for each student, there are going to be particular triggers. We want them to be able to identify these triggers and to identify those strategies that are calming. We also know that anybody who experiences stressful situations, it is often very difficult to identify coping strategies in the midst of those situations. And it's especially difficult if you haven't spent time thinking about these things ahead of time. Those moments of significant anxiety are not good teachable moments. Teachable moments occur around coping strategies in the time before those situations arise. So I think it is important that we do some work with students ahead of time. Now, again, there is a fine line between delving into the role of a mental health counselor and supporting them around some more basic work to do in identifying triggers for anxiety and coping strategies. If they're having trouble with each of those things, that might be an opportunity to recommend that they meet with a mental health counselor. Helping students to develop, let me pause there actually. Any thoughts or comments about that? Or questions that you have about, or fears that you might have about incorporating that kind of work with students up front? Other apps besides Calm. There's another main one that I'm just not thinking of right now, but I will send that to Will so that he can share with you all. Yes, Liliana, that's a great way of putting it. You can be therapeutic without doing therapy. So Casey brings up a really good point, which is it can be difficult to find therapists who are trained in working with autistic people or people with intellectual disabilities. Some of the work that we do is actually through our center is training mental health providers. I will tell you a lot of that work is just giving them a sense of calm that they already have the large majority of training that they need to work with autistic people. I think many mental health providers are unnecessarily kind of frightened about working with autistic people. And really, there's really no reason for it because there is so much good that they can do for those individuals. So I think working with, and Will may have suggestions on how to connect with or identify therapists in your communities who can do this kind of work. But it can be a challenge, although there is a growing recognition that autistic people need therapy. And so I agree, though. I think that is something that is more challenging. So Alan brings up a great point, which is the challenge of working with students whose families are insistent on being involved. This is a really tricky issue and is probably deserving of its own separate training. So I'm not going to say, I could go on for a while about it here. I will just acknowledge it's tricky and challenging for everybody. It's challenging for us too, if it's any consolation, Ellen. I think that where we have found our best success is when we are from the very beginning framing for students and families the kind of role that families can play in their college students' lives that's most beneficial, helping them to understand the importance, and also across all of our staff, reminding everyone that the experience of family is one where they have not seen their child probably get great support throughout their entire life. And so the track record on them taking their hands off the reins is not good. In fact, for most families, it's pretty awful. So We try to keep that in mind too, and try to form a bridge to families. It doesn't mean that we share information with them that's inappropriate. Um, but we also help our staff to recognize that we are a small slice in the pie of a student's total life. And so we try to make that connection with families. We try to give families an outlet to share information with one another. And we try to share general information as much as possible with families, helping them to understand when exam time is coming up, giving them general strategies that they can use with their student. It is purposefully not individualized, but it does, I think, at least symbolically go a long way to sharing with families. That's not to say that you won't still have families who are going to have a real difficult time with allowing their student to be the decision maker. That's not only scary for them, it is probably reminding them of really awful experiences throughout that child's life. So again, it is tricky and it warrants more discussion. So I'll just leave it at that. You want to encourage students as you're thinking about their mental wellness to also take mental breaks, helping them to identify preferred activities, building schedules for breaks into their calendar, and also helping them to build social connections. I think COVID-19 preparedness is obviously something that we've all had to learn on the fly, and there are lots of information resources out there. Some are much more reliable than others. So helping to point students toward more reliable pieces of information is really helpful. We worked with our library to offer a webinar for students on how to identify good resources, reliable resources about information on COVID-19 and COVID-19 preparedness. Your institution probably has online training, and so you're going to want to connect students to that. Some of your students may need proactive support on mask wearing, especially if they've been isolated in their home for a long time and not spending a lot of time out in the community. They may not understand proper ways of wearing a mask. And so proactively sharing this information with them, I think it can help them out a lot in a lot of ways. I mentioned it earlier, the other piece to remember is a proactive discussion with the students about different actions and decisions that people are making, and reinforcing how they can control what they can control in a safe way, and how to deal with those who may be functioning differently than what the rules are or than how they believe. That can be really challenging for some autistic people and some people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so making a proactive outreach to them and helping them to think about this can be really helpful. For those that aren't able to see it, Will shared, we were talking before about identifying mental health therapists, and he offered that the regional center may provide services and is offering to for folks to email him if they have questions about ways of finding therapy and other counseling services in their area. Thank you, Will. So I'd like to return to Sam for a moment. So if you remember, Sam found herself late to her exam, had to race to her exam, had to sort of talk down the distressing messages that autism and ADHD and anxiety were sending her. She called it stubbornness. That was her sort of way of getting getting herself to focus in on the exam and complete it. So thinking about Sam now, What sort of additional stressors do you think she would be facing? And how might her autism or anxiety or ADHD be impacting her differently? Picture Sam on your campus. What sorts of things do you think might be more difficult for her? Yeah, adapting again. Sam spoke about the challenges of exam times and the fact that schedules are off. We know that schedules are all off nowadays. Losing track of time could also be more difficult for her. Vicki mentioned everything amplified. Same issues, but everything amplified. I think you're right, Vicki. Oh, Joe, you bring up a great point with tech issues. Yeah, so, ensuring that Sam is adequately prepared ahead of time, I think it's going to be really important. What additional coping strategies do you think Sam might need to learn as she's adjusting? Or how might she take her coping strategies that she already has, but strengthen them? Mindfulness, good communication, taking one step at a time. Yeah, this is great. Working backwards to meet deadlines, maintaining her commitment. She clearly is a very committed person. And so I think building off of that that's a great idea, Liliana. I like the idea, Vicki, of teaching Sam how to practice mindfulness. It seems like she would definitely need to utilize mindfulness more. She was sort of getting there as she talked about finding ways to relax, finding ways to manage her time in between exams. Right, Casey. You're right. She wouldn't have to worry about being in her pajamas, no socks. I felt like I was getting all dressed up because I put on a button-down shirt for the talk today. You all offered some great coping strategies, and so it's certainly going to be more stressful. Are there additional resources that are available on your campuses or elsewhere that Sam might benefit from? Virtual study sessions, you're right, Casey, could be quite helpful for her, especially as she's balancing having multiple exams on the same day, as many students do. Finding ways to ensure that she's studying for all of those study sessions are a great way to do that. Mental health counseling, I think, is another strategy that Sam would probably benefit from, knowing that she's going to feel, as you all said, she's probably going to experience those same sorts of challenges, but amplified. Joe, it's a great point. One-on-one strategy sessions are going to be really important to get her to get her to focus in on what her plans are, what sort of goals does she have. I like that Miriam's suggesting help with Canvas and Zoom, especially if she's going to be juggling some in-person courses and some virtual courses, as you all are describing, remembering the different kinds of rules associated with those, or the rules associated with taking exams online versus taking exams in person. That's going to be really important. And so all of that's going to really benefit from her integrating meditation and mindfulness. It's a really great point. You all have great suggestions, and I really appreciate everybody's, so many people participating. So let's talk about supporting social support. Students are going to get reconnected with campus. In some cases, this is going to be in person. In some cases, this is going to be virtual. And many of the students you support are there. One of the big reasons about why they are in college was in connecting with others who are of a similar age and who have similar interests. And so, of course, academics, of course, career development are important reasons, but it's hard to not put social connection too much farther down the list. And so you are going to want to think about how to help students get connected or reconnected with their social networks. So this might be through campus clubs and organizations, helping them to identify what are their interests, what sort of service opportunities are they interested in. If you have Greek life on your campus, helping them to connect with that if they are interested. I think things like the DSPS club that was mentioned earlier, if I understood it right, that's a kind of a peer mechanism. I think that can be really helpful. I have found sometimes with those clubs, for some students, that works out really well. They're very open to that. Others are less interested in connecting with students with disabilities solely, and they really want to more so connect with people who have similar interests. Supporting students in connecting with campus events and activities. And I know for some of you, campus life is going to look different than others. And for many of you, residence life may not be available. But even still, I would imagine that there are opportunities that are built for to help students connect with one another. And so I think working together to ensure that those are inclusive activities is going to be really important, as well as helping to build connections with academic groups and peers with similar interests. So students who are returning to campus who have been virtual for a while may not know how to do these things. And so, or if they were there before, it might require rebuilding them. So for students that are returning to in-person and are wanting to reconnect with in-person activities, it will require some more proactive support in helping them understand how to do so. So that might mean reintroducing them to the opportunities that are available, helping them to understand how to access resources, or in some cases, maybe helping them to, and looking through together at what the options are and how they can connect with groups of similar interests. Some may also need help facilitating access, and that may require working with them to strategize for how introductions can be made, or helping them to script out introductions, whether that's by email or in another way. It might mean in some cases engaging in some outreach between your office and those clubs. And that might not be, you might choose to do it. It might be best to do it not on behalf of a single student, but rather in general. I find many of those clubs, many of those offices are very open to brief trainings, where often we'll go and we'll try to time it so that we're coming during a staff meeting. We do try to keep it brief. We try to dispel many myths, and offer some really easy go-to strategies and identify a point person within that club. Oftentimes within the club, there are people that would be especially interested in diversifying that group, and they're interested in that diversity, including people with disabilities. Or they may benefit from you helping to educate them on how disability is a form of diversity and therefore warrants more work around inclusion and helping them understand how to do that. It may be that they're very open to it, they just don't know how. I think it can be really helpful to students if your office can offer this, to offer opportunities to process afterward. Students, in the same way that students benefit from having another person to help them identify their strengths and identify their challenges, in these kinds of situations that can be incredibly fun, but also anxiety provoking, students benefit from the time to help them identify their successes and troubleshoot challenges that arose so that they can be more and more successful. You don't want the opportunity to, if for whatever reason there was any sort of negative experience, you want to ensure that that's not the student's last time in engaging in a social activity, or maybe even that type of social activity. It may be that there are some things that could be easily repaired, but that student just may not realize it. And you want to ensure that students are planning out time for future events. We have some students that are so overwhelmed with their academics that they have a really difficult time finding time for more fun social engagement activities. And yet we know that this is important for all of us. And as I mentioned, chances are that's probably part of the reason that students are in college. So helping them to purposefully find time for these sorts of activities in their schedule can also be beneficial. Chances are students will have the opportunity to participate in virtual engagement events as well. So helping them to stay connected and socially engaged through technology is also going to be beneficial. It may be some time since students have engaged virtually, or they may never have at all if they just haven't been able to do this yet during their college career. So supporting them in getting access to gaming platforms and group chats and watch parties are really important. Now, some of the students may need no help in doing this. And this might be a great way that you can identify mentors or peers who you also support, who do a great job of engaging in all of these things. Or maybe through things like the DSPS club that was mentioned earlier, their peers might be able to facilitate access. I know, frankly, if it were me, I would probably be looking to peers to facilitate access to these sorts of things, because some of them I know fairly well. Others, I depend on the students to teach me about them. But nonetheless, again, social engagement through virtual activities, we know it was already an important part of students' lives. And now, 2 years into COVID, it's that much more of an important part of students' lives. And we want to make sure students with disabilities have access to that. So that also means helping them to understand some of the rules around these sorts of platforms or other areas, and helping them to understand some of the social expectations that are involved in these. And again, this is where I would involve peers in teaching those rules as well, because I know I have certain rules that I think should exist for those platforms, but I don't know that they're necessarily followed. And I would want to put a student in a position where they're learning it from someone who has greater expertise, which is more likely their peers. Before we move forward and talk a little bit more about how to support students who are struggling with mental health challenges, any other strategies that folks want to share around social support on your campuses, or strategies you all have used that have been especially helpful? Student versus staff game nights, such a great area, such a great idea. I imagine it gives a student, it sounds like probably, at least if it were the students versus our staff, a really empowering opportunity for students, because I have a feeling they would kick our butts in any sort of game night, except maybe a trivia. Yeah, it's a great idea. It sounds like a lot of fun too, and I think, you know, we all need more relaxing, fun activities in our lives, and activities that allow us to just de-stress and be able to be with each other in a less stressful environment, and that sounds like it would achieve that sort of thing. So I'd like to shift and talk about those students that are struggling with mental health challenges. We talked about it a bit earlier, but because we know, I want to spend a little more time on it because we know that so many students are facing mental health challenges. So you want to make information about mental health more open and accessible. I would recommend proactively sharing information about resources if your campuses have access to, if your campuses have campus wellness activities or centers, if you have access to counseling centers, or if you have access to student organizations that focus on mental health. I listed here, Active Minds is the name of a student group that is on many college campuses that is all about mental health awareness, and it is led by students with lived mental health experiences who have experienced mental health challenges. As I mentioned earlier, incorporating general discussion about mental health with coaches or other support staff so that you're being upfront about mental health and the challenges that many people are facing right now, and having those open conversations, as well as perhaps developing pipelines to resources that exist on campus or resources that exist off campus. So internally, you might think about how you can normalize the experience of mental health challenges. I think we all benefit from understanding and being reminded that everyone is struggling right now. You want to help them to set reasonable goals for themselves. It may be that they've come into college with very high expectations that might have been achievable under a more traditional college setting that just may be quite difficult right now. So helping them to set reasonable goals that they could surpass and then achieve those original goals, or help them to feel satisfied with new goals that need to be set. Assisting them in developing self-monitoring skills so that they can identify when they're starting to feel more anxious or feel more depressed so that they can reach out for help. Having them identify and practice coping strategies and teaching them more general strategies like deep breathing, gratitude journals. And you may even want to consider opening each session with a mental health check-in. So this is something that we've instituted in our program. We incorporated, we actually designed it as a Google form. So students are asked to fill this out within a day or so of their session. And the information through the Google form, the results are then sent to the identified person that they're meeting with. This is a very, very brief mental health check-in that that exists out in the literature. And I can get the citation for Will, who can disseminate to you all if you'd like it. It asks very basic questions about the students' mental health and how they've been specifically over the past week. And we use this as a way to engage in conversations, proactive conversations about mental health with the students. In the chat, you'll also see, and Will posted, there was a question about if you have examples about virtual student staff games. If anyone can respond to this. I know we've done things with Kahoot that have been a lot of fun. So developing, whether it's trivia about campus or trivia about just mainstream kinds of things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Some things like that we've used actually and been a lot of fun. So as I mentioned, this mental health check-in is something that we use that all of our students fill out each week, and then information is shared with us. What this also allows us to do through Google is to track students' mental health, changes in mental health over time, so that we can also develop a greater awareness for ourselves of where are the points in the semester where our students' mental health is changing, so that we can beef up our resources during that time and proactively insert different supports for our students. This is an example of a gratitude journal. One of the things that we know from research is gratitude journals are an incredible way of diffusing anxiety. So, and it can be really basic. Again, this is just one example. But we often will have students reflect at a time of more peacefulness during their day, whether that's in the morning or in the evening as they're going to bed, to reflect on things that they're grateful for. So it might be things that they learned, things that they're looking forward to, favorite moments from the day, things to be happy about. Using gratitude journals has an incredible impact on decreasing anxiety and boosting overall well-being. We talked earlier about the benefits of utilizing mental health counseling. And so we want to think about this too, and you all can potentially have a role in this. So as we mentioned earlier, asking students about whether or not they have mental health providers, being open as a program and asking these sorts of questions and creating opportunities for conversation. And talking with students about their counselor being an active part of their support team, which means being involved in information sharing between yourselves and the student and the counselor, as well as perhaps the family. So if you are close to a traditional university, they probably have, through their counseling center, you may be able to get a list of local counselors, including some who specialize with specific populations. Often, because most counseling centers at universities are utilizing very brief models of treatment and then referring out, they often do keep an up-to-date list of specialists in the area. Supporting students in being open and talking about their medication and the impact that their medication has and its side effects is going to be also a really important part of the support that you're offering. It's really helpful if you can create an environment of openness where students are able to talk about these things. So there was a question about, so Casey asked, do we have a mental health team that we can notify if a student is showing signs of depression or suicidal ideation in the mental health survey? So that's a great question, Casey. So typically, if we have grave concerns about the student, yes. So when we first meet with the student, we ask them these questions about, do they have a mental health provider? We identify who we can contact on their behalf. We have language that we insert as part of the contract with the students that shares with them, here are the steps that we take if we have concerns for your mental health. It always starts with talking with the student, and we let the students know under what situations might we notify others. We happen to have a counseling center on campus, so we have the benefit of having that team to reach out to if we have concerns for safety. I do think it's helpful to for students to have some mechanism for your team to reach out to if you are thinking about that. In our case, the counseling center on campus, which has a crisis line, it tends to be our go-to. As a community college, it might be that you have a community mental health center in your community who can function in this sort of way. For many students, their family might serve as that outreach. But I think an initial attempt with the student is especially beneficial because you may find that they have a team as well that they might not have shared with you previously.
Dr.
So you want, yes.
There's a question also in the Q&A. I think this is a really good question here. If you do a mental health check-in, what do you do and who do you refer to if the scores are worrisome?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it is tricky, and there is a sort of responsibility that does come along with asking those kinds of questions. But I would share that we also do a disservice to the students if we're not asking those kinds of questions because we know that they're struggling. So I think, frankly, that's why up front, it's important to have these open conversations so that you can establish with the students at the outset if we have concerns for your mental health, who can we talk to about that? And as I mentioned, so in our case, if they don't have a mental health provider, we do happen to have access to our campus mental health counseling center. So we can utilize that center. Do you all have, when you have concerns for, let's say that you haven't asked these questions, but mental health concerns arise for students, what sorts of steps do you all take on your campuses? Or what are some examples? I understand that each campus might be quite different. Great, and I'm happy to share. Actually, at the end, I will share a PDF. I have a PDF of our full survey, and I can share that at the end of the talk. I'll also share it with Will, who can disseminate it to you all. So some of you are sharing that there are particular counselors that you can link students with. Robert sharing that at his campus, students are referred to the health center to make an appointment with a therapist. So I would look to, yeah, and Casey, I would imagine a lot of campuses are in a similar predicament. And you're right, a warm handoff is always preferred. And even if that's not available, I would say you're still helping the student by talking with them about it. You know, we know from trainings that we do on suicide, for example, that, you know, raising questions, I'm not suggesting that you necessarily embed questions about suicidal ideation in your survey. However, many people are fearful that asking about suicide almost creates a situation where someone's going to have thoughts of suicide. We know from the research that's just not the case. So by asking these questions of students, you're telling them that there is someone that is willing to listen to them and someone that's there to support them. You should also create boundaries with them and help them to understand that there are limits to the support you can offer, and you are there to hear that they have these concerns, and you are willing to help them figure out who to go to and who to talk to. So As you'll see in the handouts, as you connect with mental health providers, there are modifications that can be made to cognitive behavior therapy. There are ways of using mindfulness in autism. And I would encourage you to share those things with them. There's also systemic advocacy that you're going to want to consider. So in closing, a mantra that I'll share for myself and that I hope for all of you, that some of you may be familiar with, is Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free, and may the thoughts, words, and actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. I think by being kind to yourselves, it will lead you to being kind to students and being kind to their families and your colleagues and others. So thank you for all that you're doing to help students succeed.
Thank you for the participation here today. I want to thank Dr. Brian Friedman for sharing from the wealth of his knowledge with the California community colleges, and particularly the style of presentation where he engaged with all of you throughout the conversation. I've done many, many webinars, and the issue of participant engagement is something that one thinks about all the time. And Dr. Friedman, you really did a good job of that today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I know that people are indicating their appreciation for the webinar in the chat. I just didn't want us to miss a comment by Elizabeth Perez. She said, we have a student of concern form, which is completed by staff, and there's a team that reviews the concern and then follows up. That's for students that have not disclosed directly but shown concerning behaviors. In other cases, we do refer the student to the Student Health Center on campus. Thank you for that comment, Elizabeth. Let's see if there were any other comments or questions from the chat. Again, thank you, thank you, thank you. I think I'm going to place one more time. Here's a link to the evaluation from today's webinar. We must have spent, I don't know, Dr. Friedman, with you, maybe 9 months, but it's more than a year that we have been having conversations with national experts on identifying someone that could facilitate the conversation that we've begun here today. And thank you, Dr. Friedman, for making yourself available to share as you have. We will continue these conversations in the weeks and months to come. We do have some other webinars in the pipe that we believe will be launched, probably one next month and again in March. So please look to your emails. We'll be sharing information about the webinars through the listservs. And again, thank you, thank you, thank you for participating with us today. If there are remaining questions, we could stick around for a few more minutes. Please feel free to use the chat feature or the Q&A. I trust that everyone received earlier the PowerPoint, the link to the PowerPoint. I believe Dr. Friedman is going to share 1 or 2 resources with me that I will in turn also pass on to all of you. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Please be safe and take care of yourselves and the students, some of which will be returning to campus really shortly. I see a question about the poem.
Yes, I will send that to Will so that he can share with all of you, and I will share back with Sam about how much you all appreciated her poetry. I know she'll very much appreciate it.
Lovely.
Thanks so much, everyone.